Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. Our moderator is virtual today. We've got Dr. Virginia Marshall online in the Kimberleys. We'll just see if the tech comes through. There she is. Hello, Dr. Marshall.
No, hi everyone. Hi Aotearoa. Wonderful to see everyone online, and I'm coming to you from Aotearoa country on the Dampier Peninsula in the Kimberley region, and in front of me is the most beautiful, calm sea, and it's 37 degrees.
Dr. Marshall, I'll ask you to start with welcome to acknowledgement of country and to pass on to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Uinari Virginia Marshall, Wiradjuri Nurrumbung. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this important session. I acknowledge our country and also the country that you are on and the Indigenous peoples that are attending today, and we also have an incredible legacy from our elders and the incredible sacrifice that they have made for us that we can actually forge on with these very, very important responsibilities on country. And we also acknowledge our youth who are our future. Thank you. Madangul.
Kia ora koutou. Nā mihi nui ki a koutou, nā mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o tēnei rohi, nau mai. Acknowledges Virginia has prepped us, the First Nations and First Peoples of this lands, these ancient lands and waters, the oldest continuing surviving culture. We honour elders past, present and future, and the enduring legacy, as Dr. Virginia said, because of their sacrifices we are here today. So kia ora, ko Mel Mark Shepard tōku ingoa, he uri au o Ngāti Parau rātou ko Ngāti Kahanunu, Aotearoa, Te Aotearoa, Ngāti Raukawa, Te Ati clans, Gunn and Macintosh hoki. I am the CEO or a founder and a trustee of Te Tira Whakamātaki, which is a Māori environmental not-for-profit, also the home of the Māori Biosecurity Network and the National Iwi Chairs leaders and biosecurity technicians. The organisation works in climate change, biosecurity, biodiversity and disaster risk reduction, so a bit of everything. I'm not the Kaihotu Chief Māori Advisor to the Ministry for the Environment. I was once upon a time. I am the Deputy Secretary Māori Rights and Interests at the Ministry for the Environment, but I'm definitely here with this is my caveat, I'm definitely here with my Māori hat on, and that's because I will say something inappropriate and get in trouble, so kia ora.
And I think that's what we also share as Indigenous peoples of Australia, so I'll just make that comment as well. Thank you for acknowledging that issue. I think we'll jump straight in because all of the panellists have such incredible dedication and commitment to the areas that they advocate for, and they've dedicated their lives, as you can read through their biographies. It is simply wonderful and such an honour to be here today. So let's jump into the questions. And also, Mel, I think I'll start here. You've done an incredible amount of work with treaty discussions and also talking about policy and how it connects. So it connects to Western, that is the Crown, and also to iwi and to the Treaty of Waitangi. How do these issues interface with the important decision-making processes that really seek to not only have recognition but also use and purpose for Indigenous knowledge?
Kia ora for the question. I'm hoping I get it right, and lucky there's a transcriber who's putting it up in front of me. So that will help a wee bit, and probably I'll still go off track, and someone will correct me, my colleague here. Your policy is a relatively new area for me, so my background is I worked for Tribe, for Ngāi Tahu for a very long time, and then went and worked as an academic at Lincoln University in the biosecurity, biodiversity space, and I'm a recovering academic working in policy. I'm not sure how long you're allowed to say you're recovering. I keep asking Simon. I reckon I've got 4 years before I have to stop using that as an excuse. So policy is relatively new to me, and I think like many people, when I went into policy, I thought it was going to be this big scary system that I couldn't understand, because when I sat on the outside representing iwi or Māori as an academic, I really struggled to get, as you've said, breakthrough and to work at that nexus between Indigenous knowledge, science and policy. And then I got into policy and realised that everyone was making it up as they went along. It wasn't actually that hard or complicated or scary. It was just that it wasn't really underpinned by evidence, let alone Indigenous knowledge. And that's partly because of the pace that it moves at and the political cycle we have in New Zealand. So the political cycle of 3 years effectively means you've got a year to do something and a year to campaign and a year to kind of relax. And so I've learnt really quickly that with the cycle, the political cycle and the pace that we're moving at, evidence, and Māori views in particular, or Indigenous views, have to be ready to go really fast. And they have to be translatable and in a language that most people can pick it up and work it into their policy advice. And that's, let alone having to deal with the political, the nuances of racism and inherent racism in the system, and people not wanting to acknowledge that Māori have anything legitimate to offer. So policy in itself is open and trying to be inclusive, but it's moving at such a pace that it's very hard to do it. I have some pet peeves, but I think they'll also work on. So what we have learned in our space is that we have to learn to speak the language of policy, and that's helped us. So working in the Crown certainly helps us language. I also hate that at the same time. I hate the fact that we have to learn the language and the cadence and the rhythm of government, but government doesn't have to learn the language and the cadence of Indigenous peoples. We've learnt that we have to tone, we have to police our toning. That's why I caveat everything by saying I will say something inappropriate. We have to be very careful with our language. We don't want to upset the fragility of policymakers or people in power. But I also hate that. I hate the fact that we have to be careful and we have to tone what we say, even though we're passionate about our place and our people. And so we have learnt to language and to be very careful to work at that nexus. The issues that we deal with are largely in the kind of biosecurity and climate space. We believe that we do have encoded in our knowledge and in our language solutions, and we've got really good examples, especially in the plant biosecurity space, where our medicines, our rongoa, have created solutions for some pretty nasty diseases that science hasn't been able to solve for 10, 15 years. And we're seeing great success when we work with our elders and our communities in trying to address those issues. We know that we have solutions for climate change and processes we want to see adapted in our climate adaptation. But again, ensuring that policymakers understand the benefit of working at place with people and how to translate and pick those up and work them into a policy system that works alongside science and one doesn't co-opt the other or take it over, is quite complicated. But there are certainly success stories out there, and we have worked really hard, as you said, to try and do that. I'll shush.
Thank you. And then the other issues that you've raised is not only the ism, very well said. You've raised also the isms and those problems, but also I think that the decolonisation process that you talk about and sharing power, especially in relation to the context of the discussion on disaster resilience, how do we actually build in a very strong Indigenous knowledge and science when there are so many potential catastrophes at large in the future of this planet? How do we do that interface and also have decolonisation at the forefront? Thank you.
You want me to start, and then I'll hand over to this fella's got lots to say in that space. I mean, for me, one of the very first places we need to start is in places like this, decolonising, and this panel know, and those who turned up here on Monday know that I have a real frustration in spaces like this where Indigenous voices are side sessions and entertainment. While we may all look pretty in our lovely gear, we're not entertainment. We're not here, to tick boxes and to provide the welcome and the ceremonial aspects. I genuinely believe that until Indigenous peoples are acknowledged as nation states in their own right, and we are on the top table sitting next to ministers and leading conversations, we won't be able to get to a space where we truly work at the nexus between science policy and Indigenous knowledge. When I look at the Sendai framework, and I know Penny can talk to this much stronger than I can, but when I look at the framework and I search for Indigenous, something, again, a colleague taught me, there's 4 mentions of Indigenous. 2 of them are in the general context of everyone else, so we're alongside, the poor, the disabled, the migrants, tamia, and the other 2 times we're mentioned in terms of we might have something to offer the system. So, inherently we're already excluded or we're already put to the side, and it's very hard then to ensure that our voice, our knowledge, our systems, our infrastructure, our people are leading and at the forefront of the responses to disasters, which is where we need to be. And so my inherent nature, and I will caveat this by saying I come from a political family. If you're from New Zealand, you'll know that. By whakapapa, my marae, where I come from, was the very first Māori parliament. That's in my blood. My father was a minister. So I genuinely believe that we have to set our own structures up. We have to challenge government. Hence the reason I'm not wearing my government hat. We have to challenge government for a space at the main table, and we have rights as a nation state as our own nation state to be at the front table and pushing. And so in spaces like this, and in responses back in country, that for me it is either you come in, full ball and you try and change the system and you sit on panels like this and you advocate, or you walk out and you go set up your own system. And we did a wee bit of both in Indonesia recently, where we participated in the main sessions. We had our voice, but we also organised side events that were for Indigenous voices only. And that was in response to the fact that it was really hard to work at that nexus safely, and safely is important, and in a space where we felt valued and we were resourced. So.
Thank you, Mel. And I will take it over to Penny. And I think that the incredible work that you've done with WASH, but also the impact that you see with health assessments and a whole range of issues with rising sea levels, as we've seen in the Pacific, and also adaptation and mitigation issues with climate change. How do you see that we're going to have those strengths Mel talked about, accepted, acknowledged, recognised, embedded, and also managed by Indigenous people? How will that appear as just a complete norm across the Pacific and Australia?
Thank you, Virginia. Before I answer the question, let me talk a little bit about the work that I'm doing so that the audience really know where I'm coming from. So I'm working for Live and Learn. And Live and Learn, our main office is here in Melbourne, Live and Learn Australia. And then we have, it's a network. So then we have 11 regional offices in Asia and the Pacific. I am working for Live and Learn Tonga. So all my answer to this question will be based on all our programs that I did in Tonga, and also my own reflection working with Indigenous communities in the Pacific. It's more like a reflection to the government and also to the UNDRR to help me, because I am telling you, like Fiji and Mongolia, I am very struggle working at the community level. Remember, they are here. Originally, like what those guys were saying, are struggling. And imagine me working in the community level. I am very frustrated and struggle, and I'm telling you, I don't know what to do. That's why I came to this forum and asked them to help me, because I'm very frustrated. I don't know where to go and ask for help. So my first point I want to highlight in the work that I'm doing and representing the community, Indigenous Pacific community that I serve and protect, is that in my observation, there is no clear guidelines to guide the implementation that I'm doing in terms of Indigenous, local, and traditional knowledge to the community that I serve to guide us properly in the implementing of the sanitary framework to make sure those framework or target that they are asked for us to do will be achieved by 2030 and beyond. That's why I want to make this call for the government and also the UNTRL to help us develop a clear framework so when we implement our activities in the community level, we align all our activity and make sure that we will achieve the target that they want us to do. Right now, there's no clear framework. So imagine that if Fiji and Mongolia struggle, I am more struggle in Tonga because why? Fiji and Mongolia are better, they have the better resources than us in Tonga. So that's why I want to highlight that first point. My second point is that regarding the data. If you listen very carefully to what Fiji and Mongolia were presenting on Monday, I was shocked that we share the same frustration. That's why I called the government of Australia, please help us, and also the UNTRL, help us make a database available for all the indigenous, local, and traditional people so that we can use it, because right now we don't have a database. We don't know where to look. And if we go there, we struggle. Imagine, I'm telling you, I am struggle. There's no guidance whatsoever. I'm very frustrated working in Tonga. So I ask again, make this call for the government of Australia, because they have the resources, I know they have the capacity, and also the UNTRL, please help us. Develop a data there, because they have it in other areas, but not in the indigenous, local, and traditional knowledge area. So I need them to help us do this, so when we get lost, whatever, there's at least a benchmark or guideline to help us do the implementation. Because by doing that, we will help them, try to achieve the indicator like Fiji. That's what Fiji was saying. I remember that what Fiji was presenting. They are struggling in trying to define because they don't know. So we need UNDRR and also government of Australia to help us develop a database so we can put all our data there and they put it up there so can all our citizens, indigenous people in our community can access also to the database. The third point I want to highlight is that regarding that there's no, because in my opinion, remember this framework, the sanitary framework, those people up there, they are okay because it's their stuff. They know everything. So what I need, in order to have that understanding, go to where I work at the community level. Imagine what the community know, nothing. It's just like me, I know nothing. They know everything. So what I need, they should have some sort of officer at that level, work down to the regional level, and then go down to the national level, and also the community, so that there is a systematic way how the information flow. Because right now, there's a missing gap there. And then we don't know where to go and ask for help. That's why we are very frustrated at the bottom. Very, very frustrated. When I'm telling you, because I am implementing a climate resilience islands program, and what we do, when I look for a way to do the data collection, we don't know. So I have to find my own way how to collect the data. See how frustrated I am? Very frustrated. Then I look, and then after that, because once you collect the data, you have to analyze the data. Then I look around, I don't know. So I have to come up with a new way, my own way how to do this. And then luckily, this is a 4-year project funded by MFED. It's not only Tonga, but Solomon Island, Vanuatu, and Tuvalu. So at least I am telling you this story, so by 2024, when we completed our project, at least we have some sort of guideline or benchmark. When we get lost, okay, we go to this because they have the information to help us. Another point I want to highlight is also the training and funding. If you listen very carefully to what Fiji and Mongolia present on Monday, they were talking about the same thing. We need a proper training how to define the indicators in our context. That's why Fiji was struggle. We remember Fiji, they are national government. I'm not a government, I'm an NGO. And if they are struggle, Imagine how struggle I am to define the indicator that those people giving me to work on. So what I'm proposing, Virginia, is to make sure when they develop this global framework to do a proper training and regionally at the regional level, then come to the national level to a training so those people train me, because I am representing the community that I serve and protected in the Pacific. Because if they train me, I will help, and then I will know how to define the indicator to make sure they are happy. I also know how to measure those indicators because they show me how to do it in the training. And also, when they do those training, and I'm pretty sure by 2030 and beyond, whatever they are trying to achieve will be somewhere around 90% to 100% achieved. Regarding the funding, absolutely they are right. Fiji and Mongolia, and not only Mongolia, but also the other countries, share the same. I listened around the discussion from Monday and today. There's no funding, proper funding, to address the issue on indigenous local and traditional knowledge. The funding that we receive from MFED is not directed to indigenous local and traditional knowledge. It's part of our activity for the Climate Resilience Islands program. So I am making this call again to the government of Australia and to all government and also to the UNDRR. Please help us. We cannot achieve the sanitary framework if we don't have enough funding or climate funding to address what the indigenous people need. Because if we don't have the funding to serve them and to make sure they are well protected from disaster, we can't achieve the sanitary framework. So that's why I'm making this call. Yeah, that's why I'm making this call, Virginia. So if they help us do this, I'm pretty sure whatever they're going to do in 2030 and beyond will be more effective, and then we deliver effective and efficient indigenous, local, and traditional activity to the community that we serve. Malo.
Thanks, Penny. I really appreciate that passion. Yes, it's very, very needed when working in our Indigenous communities as well. And turning to Rachel, you also have some incredible experience in forging women's cool fire farming practices with some very, very dedicated Indigenous women. So since the fire in 2019, Rachel, we've seen a great interest in fire management by non-Indigenous peoples and also an interest by government, where we've had an inquiry into New South Wales, for example, in Chapter 18 on disaster solutions, and one of those being cool fire farm management as a really important policy step forward. What do you see, and why do you see this wonderful opportunity for Indigenous women to embrace these practices, but also what need do you see in the future given the IPCC reports and the issues that we may well go to 2 degrees? Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Virginia. For those of you who don't know, I'm Rachel and I work for an Indigenous organisation called Fire Sticks Alliance. Within Fire Sticks Alliance, we are working with First Nations communities across Australia to bring back traditional land management practices and in particular cultural fire practices as well. So Fire Sticks has been around for about 20 years or so. But since the 2019 and 2020 bushfire season that we had here in Australia, it's really pushed the urgency and the need to really sort of bring that to the forefront of how we look at, I suppose, fire reduction, fire resilience, and really look at our relationship when it comes to land management, and in particular fire in that space. Within that, I've been a firefighter for 15 years outside of my cultural fire knowledge myself. So I completely understand the way that Australia and different fire managers across Australia actually implement fire practices. and they got it all wrong, and it's back to front. And it's all about a reactionary space when it comes to looking at mitigation and so for that, it's tricky. You know, our people have been here since first light. We've been managing country since then. We have the solutions and we have the answers in moving forward. The issue that we have, regardless of the Royal Commission and the state bushfire inquiries that we've had in Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales and Tasmania and WA, is the fact that although they encouraged First Nations voices to be a part of the Royal Commission and in their inquiries, we were still regarded, you know, quite low when it comes to recommendations to that. And that is quite often the case when it comes to First Nations issues in Australia, that, you know, it sort of echoes what the other panellists have been talking about, is they bring you to the table to have a discussion, and that's their tick the box tokenism around, yep, well, we've engaged, but there's no real action and there's no real implementation on the ground. There's no long-term resourcing to get our programs up and running, and to even acknowledge that our practice and our science is, you know, has been here for a really long time, and that it deserves the same recognition, if not more, when it comes to looking at, you know, everything when it comes to environment. The other thing is, you can't talk about the environment without having First Nations people at the forefront of those conversations and at the table at every level. Instead, we're having people with no expertise sitting at the table making discussions on First Nations issues, including the environment, language, law, culture. And the other issue that we do have is also women are missing from those spaces. And also First Nations leadership in those spaces. Here in Australia, we are 3% of the population. Within that, we are only 0.7% of that 3% that are in management positions or leadership positions. And within that, I'm pretty sure it's like 0.2% are Indigenous women. For my people, we are matriarch, so that therefore, you know, it's the women that hold the law and the language and the culture and the practice within my community. But our voices aren't heard. And, you know, it's a time to change all of that. It's a real need within my culture itself. We have just gone through what we call Mirana, which is a transition into grandmother dreaming time. We've been in grandfather dreaming time for quite some time. The exciting thing about that, though, is across the world we're seeing this happen. We're seeing First Nations women everywhere standing up into this space. So within Five Sticks Alliance itself, I've been there for a few years now, and we have created a culturally safe environment for women to come together across Australia to share in that intergenerational transfer of knowledge, and also the cross-cultural knowledges and the importance of having women nurturing and leading and being in that space on country.
And Rachel, what role, thank you, what role do Thank you, Rachel. What role do Indigenous sea and land managers and really our communities working on country provide in results and in regard to country management of land and sea?
Well, I think we know that land managed by First Nations people, not just here in Australia, but across the globe, we have the highest biodiversity data than anywhere else that's managed by any other land managers. So I think in itself that already proves that we know what we're doing. The land and sea rangers do amazing work. You know, it's so important to have the local rangers, people from that country who understand that country, that have story and connection and language to that place, it's important to have them making decisions there, but also caring for that place as custodians of that country that they live on. So it's really important to invest into those spaces. And, you know, that's what we do. We try to elevate community voices and needs using our platform.
Thank you, Rachel. Pratama, you've dedicated a lot of your life to peoples with disability, and you've commended a lot of comment about the invisibility of people with disabilities, most generally across so many issues. But in regards to acknowledging their knowledge as significant, not only to inform policy and law reform, what other issues have you faced and what would be a better outcomes in the future for people with disabilities?
Thank you, Virginia, for your questions, and very humbled to be here in this rich discussion on Indigenous peoples' knowledge and to build resilience. I represent 54 million Indigenous people with disabilities all around the globe. And when it comes to my country, I represent 1.3 million Indigenous people with disabilities. So when we look at the wider framework of the Indigenous Peoples' fundamental legal document, that is the UN Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 21 and 22 clearly outlines about that we Indigenous peoples are not homogeneous group. We have the diversity in terms of language, our culture, our land, our territories, and also our human diversity. So when it comes to Indigenous people with disabilities, we especially find that we are still invisible, we are still excluded, and we are still not seen at the public sphere within our own constituency. And when I say within our own constituency, we work on the intersections of gender, disability, and indigeneity from my organization, National Indigenous Disabled Women Association of Nepal. And through these organizations, we realized and we experience on our day-to-day realities within our own constituency. And when I say within our own constituency, we find a single linear demarcations and also the framing within our life stories, but at the same time, that is again connected with the national laws and policies. If you look at the constitutions of my country has such a diverse constitutions that acknowledges Indigenous people, including other marginalized groups like women, children, Indigenous people, person with disabilities, and from other marginalized communities like Dalit, Madheshi, and other ethnic minorities. But if you look at the wider framework of the policies, we still find that the policies has been framed from a very single linear approach. That means the intersections and the multiple identities that I hold as an Indigenous woman, as a woman, or as a woman with disabilities, that has not been framed in the policy. And this is where we struggle as Indigenous women with disabilities on the ground. When it comes to the impact of climate change, when it comes to the disasters, we are the one who are in the vulnerable situation, put in the front line. But when the discussions and when the decisions are being made, it is always some person or someone who decides the impact. And we are trying to raise these voices from the ground, trying to bring those experiences, the lived experiences of Indigenous people with disabilities, and trying to reflect and highlight that we are not vulnerable all the time, because we have also contributed to the family that we live, to the society, and to the nation, and to the whole planet, because as Indigenous people, we have contributed the 80% of the biodiversity. You know, we know the knowledge of the Indigenous peoples and how this knowledge has been transformed from one generation to another generation, from one age to another age. So we find that these are the things that has been missing at the national level policies. And we, again, I echo with my earlier colleagues who have outlinedly point about the the things which are in the paper, which are in the policy, and even those paper and the policies are not being transformed into the lives of Indigenous peoples. When it comes to Indigenous women, children, elderly people, and persons with disabilities, we still see that the intersections, and looking at from a very comprehensive framework within the policy is not being framed. And this is where we find the struggle. We find the struggle of listening to make our voices listen to the duty bearers, but at the same time, since we lack data, information, and evidence on these multiple marginalized groups, we find the challenges of the programmatic interventions and targeted interventions. And that is where we find that the laws, the policies at the national level has to be transformed with our lived experiences and also the solutions that we need to put forward.
Shall we go to questions, Kate? Shall I just take over? I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah, Melanie.
No, you can take over if you allow her.
You take over. Yes,
Okay. Are we meant to be doing questions?
Oh,
No?
just a discussion about
Okay.
Dr. Marshall doing, so continue the conversation.
I was going to say, well, Simon, you can come and ask questions if you want. You're good at asking questions and moderating.
And I see this here where I'm at a meeting with young people and elders, and we're trying to provide hope and also understanding that they will be taking over the work that we are going to be doing in the future. In this area that we've been discussing, what do you see are the most important issues to provide hope to our young people?
I'll start and then we'll go along, eh? What issues provide hope? Well, because then I can selfishly introduce the two young people sitting at the front here, because that's what I do. So in Indonesia, we launched, there was the, and I'll get it completely wrong, so I wrote it down, the international, campaign, Simon, on disaster risk reduction for Indigenous communities was launched by a handful of people with UN support, and the very first item, or the very first piece of work that was rolled out was the International Indigenous Youth Disaster Risk Reduction Network. And looking for young people who are younger than what was in one of the youth sessions earlier. And if you're interested, then please hook up with these two young people who can stand up in the front. Marcus Rongo Whitiao Shadbolt and Phoebe Fordyce. They are the New Zealand reps. They're looking for reps in other countries, and they already have Canada and Guatemala covered off. But for me, young people give us a huge inspiration, because not only are they, well, for us in New Zealand, we have spent decades raising our kids, taking them through our kura, our kohanga, revitalising our language, revitalising our treaty education. As Virginia said, I've spent a lot of time myself rolling out treaty education across multiple agencies and communities. So we've spent a lot of time investing in our youth, saying that they are going to make a big difference and they're going to change. I worry that they get into the system and then the doors shut and there are barriers and they get frustrated, given that they have hope to be, leading the Indigenous push, but their resilience, their commitment to their culture, their commitment to their language, to revitalising and decolonising their traditions inspires me. And so I have huge hope that they will create better systems for us. So please send your young people along to have conversations about what the world should look like from their lens. I guess the other thing that inspires me personally is my connection to elders. I've been really lucky in the science space to have been mentored by traditional knowledge holders who are very passionate about ensuring that Indigenous solutions are leading our work to create better solutions for the planet and for our people. And that doesn't mean that we allow science to co-opt, and we don't try and prove our knowledge through science, not at all. What we try and do is ensure that our knowledge and our science is being funded, resourced, and is leading the way. where technology and other forms of science or colonial science can support, that's awesome. That creates, bigger and better solutions. But the foresight of our elders to ensure that we're working at that nexus, that we use a braided river approach, as I've said before, where Indigenous knowledge and colonial science can work alongside each other and they can intersect and then they can go apart, has been really inspirational for us in our space and in our work.
Thank you,
Thank
Melanie.
you so much, Mel, and I'll pose that to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Melanie. Pratima and Rachel was talking about the inclusivity of people living with disability in all the decision making, and Rachel was talking about the inclusive of First Nation in whatever they are doing here in Australia. Now, my mind is worked differently. I'm thinking about having a Indigenous person sitting there at the top level. Why is very important? Because everything will go up and finalize from there. If we have an Indigenous representative in that level, the global level I'm talking about, or at least people with disability and Indigenous person to sit there at the top, I think everything will flow systematically and help us, because I'm working, like I said before, I'm working at the community level, will help me more, because I know for sure, I'm 100% confident whatever I will be proposed or asking these guys there, they will do it for me. So that's my point. I think this is just my personal observation, regarding the discussion that I pick it up, and also the question that you ask is very also important for the government of Australia and the UNTRR to consider, having an Indigenous person to sit at the top, and then from there it will help everyone. Malo.
Thank you, Pam.
You can go.
And just to add to that, that should be a black woman or an Indigenous woman sitting at the very top of that thing.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, whatever you recommend, Rachel. Yeah, I'll go with you. Yeah,
good.
You or Virginia.
And just to add on to all of that as well, here in Australia, we have over 500 different language groups, which means we have over 500 different law systems within our First Nations communities. So that engagement and making sure that people actually have a voice is so important. And depending on where you come from, within those language groups really will depend on whether we have our elders present or not. Unfortunately, within my family, we only have one knowledge holder left, and he's really, really unwell. I've been really fortunate that within our family, we've had a lot of that culture and language and law passed on, even though at times it's on the side and it's quiet. We've been really lucky in that, but there are a lot of communities that actually don't have elders present. So drawing on our neighbouring clan groups and nations is really important because of that cross-cultural knowledge that gets transferred down. Everything that we do within Fire Sticks is about that intergenerational transfer. It's so important to have our elders present, and it's so important to have our Jarjum, our children, present as well as a part of that learning process. So,
yeah, just to add on my earlier colleagues is, when we talk about the person in the very front level, I would also like to highlight about the meaningful participation of Indigenous people, women, and a person with disabilities. And when I say meaningful participation, most often the tokenism for Indigenous people has been a prevalent existing phenomena, and that should not be framed in the way that it should have. That is why we see the serious engagement of Indigenous peoples in the planning, in the process of discussions, and also the engagement till to the end. And when I say all these things, again, our elders, they have a crucial role. And when it comes to these kind of discussions, when we are having the Asia Pacific level, ministry level conference on disaster risk reduction, I would also like to highlight the importance that our Indigenous elders have so far done to us. When it comes to disasters, we have our own system of response, relief, recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. And this is where our Indigenous knowledge systems, the values, plays a very important role. The spiritualness of Indigenous peoples related with our land, territories, resources, and also with other spiritual elements that plays a very crucial role. And this has been transformed for us with our verbal communications, because we have the oral history. So for us it is also a crucial time that this kind of conferences allows us that how do we document this oral history into a written document. We know that the intergenerational transformation from one generation to another generation is important and it is crucial, but when it comes to Indigenous knowledge and practices, we also find the dominant world non-Indigenous groups, which is very much a westernized and colonized concept. And this is where we Indigenous peoples are aware of. And this kind of forums really enables us to find those informations, to allow us to have more shared responsibilities, and also to find the alternatives, because the alternatives and the systems that we used earlier when our grandfather was using, that is not existing at this moment, because we have the technology and not all the Indigenous elders are acquainted with this technology. So for us, this kind of discussions will also really allow us to bring and to transfer those Indigenous knowledge from our elders, and also trying to relate those knowledge into our younger generations. And when I say younger generation, the role of the children, the role of the young Indigenous people plays a vital role. And when it comes to, again, person with disabilities, most often they are been not regarded as contributors, which I've already explained. And this is where we see, when it comes to Indigenous knowledge, the resources, the medicinal herbs, this has importance when it comes to rehabilitations, response, and recovery during the disaster. So we as Indigenous peoples, we have those knowledge, and those kind of knowledge are again related with the prevalence rate of disability. It has the connection. So this is where I see the linkages between the earlier generation, that is the elder generation, to the younger generation, and transforming this knowledge and sharing to within our communities and beyond our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as the co-chair of the National Water Committee for Indigenous Peoples, and the work that I've seen over Indigenous Peoples Organisation Australia, we have a great difficulty in really providing one or two recommendations that are critical to really move forward. However, I will ask you, what are those one or two recommendations that you think are the most critical out of the conversation we've had today? Rachel?
Oh, she said Rachel.
I think I've got more than two recommendations, but I'll keep it short. Honestly, I think it's genuine engagement, like we've all spoken about, but it's also action. I think we come together so much at different conferences for different things, and there's always First Nations voices there, and they're all wanting to listen and sit down at the table, but there's no action. So I think, you know, instead of talking about it, how about we support it, and, you know, long-term resources, and actually really just action what you're saying.
Thanks, Rachel. Kenny?
Thank you, Virginia. So my first recommendation, I asked the government and also the UNTRL, please don't be angry at me, but please help me. So my first recommendation, Virginia, whatever we are talking about here, for them to go and do it, implement it. Don't bury it underground and under the table. It's very important for me because we already asked you to help us, and so please help us, because that's my first recommendation, to go and implement what we are proposed in this conference because it's very important. My second recommendation is about funding because, as you know, Tonga is a poor country. We don't have money. So in order, I'm speaking also on behalf of the Pacific because the way I look at it, if we don't have the money, and it's not only me. The head for the UNTRR in her presentation and all the most of the presentation that I listened to, climate funding is very, very important in order to achieve the sanitary framework by 2030 and beyond. So if they don't provide the money for us to do the work at the community level, we only have 8 years. And I don't think these 8 years is enough to achieve all the targets that the sanitary framework is demanding, like for me, to go back home and try to implement in order to achieve what they want. So that's the 2 recommendations that I want. For the again, please don't be angry at me, but please help me because I need your help. And second, give me money because I don't have money.
Thanks, Penny. I don't think any of the other panellists would disagree.
Thank you.
No, thanks. Pridham, what do you have to say about looking for these issues for hope? The recommendations. What would you say that are the most critical recommendations you would make?
Thank you, Virginia. So for me, I would say that we are in the paper. So we want to be in the practice, changing our lives at the grassroots level. And when I say grassroots level, we still want we want Indigenous people, the landowners, to be respected in all forms. And when I say to be respected in all forms, we want to be on the table and where we make a decision for our own issues that impacts our day-to-day lives. So these are very crucial things, but that can be only possible when we ensure that the gender lens, the cultural sensitive approach, and intersectional lens, because these are the preconditions for reaching the most vulnerable groups. And when it comes to disasters, we realize that Indigenous peoples are in the front line. They are the one who is supporting and who is contributing in the disasters and also in the whole climate change debate as a contributors, but often they are left out. So for us, it is very much important that when the midterm Sendai review is being reviewed, that has to be transformed from the global to the regional and to the national, documents. But when I say again documents, it has to be transformed into the lives of all people, ensuring that no one is left behind, including Indigenous people, women, and persons with disabilities.
Thank you, Pridham. No.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with anything that's
Thank
been
you.
said, especially resourcing. So I'm always always up for a bit more resourcing. I think that what I can add to what the panellists have already said, which is fantastic in its own right, is probably education and get out of our way. Education in the sense that one of the things that holds us back is that leaders in all spaces don't understand their Indigenous histories of their nations. So they need to get educated. They don't understand why it's so offensive that we're not sitting at the top table as rights holders of our own nation states. As I have said before, and again, I'm not representing the Crown today, I said on Monday, my father was a minister and I repeatedly told him that he was leading a government that was illegally occupying our country. And so I very genuinely believe that if we don't educate, if we don't understand our histories, we don't understand our treaties and the promises, then we can't actually make a difference because we don't know what we're trying to change. And that education is really important because when I walk out that door and I look at that pledge board, it's got some amazing ideas on there and commitments, but there's no section there for Indigenous peoples. And when I shamelessly put up a post-it that said Indigenous peoples and then started putting my own ideas underneath it, it disappeared. It got removed, and it was put under other, I think, to start off with, and then removed. So there's an education gap that we don't even understand what we're talking about, and people in power and decision making don't understand the importance of their roles and the impact that their decisions are having on communities every day, and the recolonisation of places and spaces. So education is the first one. For me, the second one, get out of the way, is that we will make things happen. We will do what we need to do at place. We will protect our communities, the things that we value, whether you're there or not. And so sometimes it's better if you just get out of the way and hand over the resources. Can I conclude that, Virginia, by saying that some very real examples for us in Aotearoa when it comes to disaster risk reduction. When I look at the Christchurch earthquakes, and I look at the response, it was really obvious to Simon and I as researchers, Indigenous researchers there, that where there were large amounts of Māori, people fared better. The communities were healthier. Their recovery was faster. Communities were pulling together. Where we went to communities where there weren't Māori, people were isolated. They were on their own. They were lonely. They weren't being fed. They didn't have power. They didn't have advocates for themselves. Our tribal nations came together, and other tribes came into our territories and helped respond. Our approaches, our values ensure that we look after each other and we look after everyone, whether they're Indigenous or not. When I look at the mosque attacks, same response. It is people on the ground, it is Indigenous people on the ground that manaaki, that support those in their communities. When I look at climate change impacts, it is always marae, it is our meeting houses, our traditional places that open the doors first. They support people through floods, through fires, through all disasters, and yet they're not resourced, they're not acknowledged, and they're not at the decision-making table. So you either front up, have them at the table and resource them, or you get out of their way and let them do it anyway. It's no point in then coming in and saying, by the way, you can't cook for those people because your kitchen doesn't have a commercial licence. So really, for me, it's educate or get out of our way, or both.
Thanks so much, everyone. It's been a genuine pleasure to actually have had this great discussion, and also I think everyone in the audience appreciates, and I hope they will also show that appreciation by a big clap. Thanks so much, and I will say adieu, manangua, and go back to a very, very cool 37 degrees Celsius. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our panel again. Thank you, Dr. Marshall.